Good morning and welcome. My name's Eric Daly. I'm joined today by consultant Stephanie Roop out of the Seattle area, and we will be co-hosting today's webinar presentation, Pet Rock or Lyft, what's trending in retirement plans and what's likely to last. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started today. First of which is we've muted the lines to improve audio quality. However, we love and appreciate questions, so as we go through today's presentation, you'll notice within the GoToWebinar app that there is the opportunity to enter questions. Feel free to do that at any time. We will tackle some of them as we go through. We may defer some of them to the end of the presentation. The second housekeeping item is we are recording today's presentation, so if you either A, are unable to attend a portion of the presentation, or B, wish to share it, or C, find it so riveting that you want to come back and revisit it, you'll have the opportunity to do that as we will send out a link to that recording at the conclusion of the presentation. Next, the hard copy slides of the presentation will also be distributed to those of you who have attended today. So please feel free not to have to dictate each slide. We'll be happy to send you those slides at the conclusion. So with that, I'll get started and give you a quick touch on our agenda today. I wanted to talk a little bit about the history and pace of innovation in retirement plan services. And then Stephanie and I will tackle 7 topics that we continue to see popping up with retirement plan sponsors and vendors alike: fee transparency and parity, financial wellness, custom target date funds, gamification, socially responsible investment alternatives, robo-advice, and 338 services, and then we'll take some questions. And with that, I'll start maybe with just the pace of innovation. You clearly define contribution plans, which will be the primary focus of our presentation today, have been around for a number of decades, and with that, we've seen over time a recurring pattern of vendors attempting to find new and innovative ways to engage participants and drive better outcomes. The grave challenge of defined contributions continues to be, and has been, getting participants engaged and participatory to a level where they can achieve success. And with each iteration and generation, we found newer and newer ways to try and tackle that equation. As we go through the presentation, I'll take some of my 20 years of retirement plan experience. And one of the true things that we certainly have noted over that period of time is that most of the effective trends tend to work their way down market, meaning that they start with large plan sponsors and become more and more cost effective to the degree where smaller plan sponsors can effectively initiate them in their retirement plan. So I'm going to go ahead and get started today, and I'll tackle fee transparency and parity, and Stephanie, please feel free to ask questions as we go through and interject as I will as well. If you look at the trends related to fee transparency and parity, first, I think it's important to understand really what fee transparency is, because it's been within the works and moving really over the last 7 to 8 years. So for retirement plans, ultimately, it's trying to provide participants a greater understanding and greater insight into the expenses they pay. And those expenses may be record keeping, administration, and employee communication expenses. They may also be, and certainly are, investment related expenses. When we look at changes to how the Schedule C to 404A5 disclosure filings required by the Department of Labor, ultimately we find ourselves in a participant situation where the Department of Labor seems to be driving us toward a process of providing more information and more insight to participants. The secondary piece of this is what we consider to be called fee parity, which is when looking at retirement plans, have we developed a structure where participants pay an amount that is reasonable and is reasonably equivalent from one like participant to another like participant? So what's creating the buzz? Certainly the challenges with participant fee disclosures. How do we comply with 404A5, and more importantly, the notion that ultimately participants should have some insight into the expenses that they're incurring. Certainly the increased pressure on plan sponsors from the Department of Labor to monitor fees and heightened scrutiny on retirement services providers in light of the new fiduciary rule that became effective on June the 9th. We are getting better and better consumers who have access to better information. The web has done that in almost all areas, and certainly retirement plans are no exception, so that participants better understand investment options. And then ultimately, I think litigation continues to be a big, big driver. If we look over the course of the last several years, large plan sponsors, if the trend flows from large plan sponsors to smaller plan sponsors, large plan sponsors have been in the business of settling large-scale class action suits, almost all of which had some component related to investment expense and fees. And when we look at the size of those settlements, while smaller plan sponsors obviously would have reduced liability, we are seeing more and more smaller class action firms take up these smaller cases and trying to test some of these settlement expectations that have been driven to the large plan marketplace. So on the consideration side, certainly transparency is a byproduct of the service providers you work with. The expectations, how they price their services and how they communicate it is driven as much by the vendor as it is by the plan sponsor. We're seeing more and more plan sponsors remove baked-in expenses at the plan investment level and breaking those out so participants can better see them. We're seeing tremendous activity in renegotiating vendor service contracts and vendor search activity to get better fee structures that have less incremental fee increase from year to year. And then deciding who should own the fees in your retirement plan, whether they're paid by the sponsor, whether they're paid by participants, whether they're paid on an asset-based level, or whether they're paid on a per capita level, so that ultimately there is rationality behind your expense schedules. And then trying to create better opportunities for participants on a side-by-side, true expense-to-expense basis to understand your plan expenses more properly. And then ultimately, how do you educate participants on what they can do with that information? Because one of the big concerns when the 404A5 disclosures came out was ultimately, what do we expect participants to do with these 20-page, 30-page disclosure documents? And I think some of the more progressive plan sponsors have come up with ways to help simplify that information or augment it with simpler information so that participants can make better decisions. So Stephanie, I'll throw it to you and then I'll give my opinion. Here to stay or quick to leave on the fee transparency and fee parity side?
I think here to stay.
I would tend to agree. I don't see, given the amount of litigation and action with the Department of Labor, that we won't see this continue to get simpler and simpler over time, and that the remaining type revenue sharing arrangements to pay plan expenses will continue to decline as the capabilities of the vendor support it. There just doesn't seem to be much that would stop that from occurring. With that, I'm going to throw it over, Stephanie. You can tackle financial wellness for us.
Excellent, thank you. So financial wellness, this is sort of a buzz that I'm sure you keep hearing over and over again, and some of you might actually be sort of tired of hearing about financial wellness because it seems to just kind of, the topic's kind of sticking around and you're probably wondering what's required of you. So quick recap, for employers, financial wellness is really a program or set of programs designed to help employees improve their overall financial health, which hopefully in turn has business impact for you. And then for employees, it's a better understanding of your personal financial situation and understanding which helps you manage the various financial challenges in your life, and sort of a holistic viewpoint on an employee's total health, but really the financial component we're seeing is really something that affects employees significantly. So it's helping, really for an employee, it's really helping them have a good understanding of their personal financial situation. So it's not affecting their day-to-day life. So why does this matter? I think it's a challenge for most employees to have access to helpful tools and good information surrounding financial wellness. And the question really is what does that mean? Does that mean having reduced debt? Does that mean having a healthy level of savings? Does that mean being prepared for emergencies? So really, depending on the individual, they're going to feel like financial health is something different to them. So financial burdens contribute to stress. I'm sure that we can all attest to that, and that affects employees long term because you result in absenteeism. So employees are gone from work, not there contributing. And another significant factor is presenteeism. So that's even worse when your employees are actually there at work, but they're, maybe they're online looking at their account balance or trying to figure out how to consolidate credit card debt on the clock, whatever it might be. This financial burden is taking up space in their mind. So when they're at work, they're not really contributing to the job at hand. The next thing would be organizational effectiveness. If your employees are present but not really present in their role, obviously your output is reduced. And when people are stressed and not feeling well, whether it's a health condition or something like this, financial stress or woes, people do not perform at their best. So this can really impact your bottom line. And then the last item is delayed retirement. If your employees are not able to retire on time, they in turn work longer, which, depending on the type of industry you're in, there's a lot of implied cost to you as a plan sponsor. So healthcare goes up significantly at the age 65, or healthcare premiums. L&I expense goes up. The cost of life and disability insurance goes up significantly. And usually when there's leave after the age of 65, they're significantly longer. So an employee who can't retire on time, it's not to say that their output is reduced in those additional years worked, but usually you're paying at a higher wage rate because they've been there longer, and then you also have these other fringe benefits and things that you pay for, which the cost goes up exponentially after the age of 65. So overall, there's cost to the organization. So a couple considerations for employers if you're looking at adding a financial wellness program, or you have one and you're not sure if it's the right fit for you at this point, is messaging. It's really important that the messaging to employees through these programs is clear and consistent, and it's really covering the issues that you might feel are pertinent. There's kind of a lot of buzz around some of the financial wellness programs out there. One I can think of is Dave Ramsey. That's a wellness program that employers pay for, and it's actually quite expensive. And with Dave Ramsey, he has a religious affiliation. So who's to say that, whether or not that's a conflict, because that could come up in the programming in some way, shape, or form. So is the messaging clear? Is it free of conflict? And does it really address the concerns that are pertinent to core financial wellness strategies without getting caught up in some of the other messaging and belief systems that might be associated with these providers? In addition, you might have someone who comes to provide wellness and education who may try to sell your employees' products. So with that, are you paternalistic? Are you concerned with the sale of these products? And, do you feel like that's appropriate? And then would you also be liable for an education provider coming out and maybe selling a product that maybe isn't appropriate? So an example might be the wellness provider might come out and talk about a program and talk about retirement savings, and somehow the conversation turns towards like annuities or a product like that. Essentially, if an employee decides to continue on with that provider, if you're allowing sales to occur, or maybe there's a relationship built after that, because of that introduction, are you then liable if the consumer felt like they weren't educated enough? So that could be a reach, but at the same time, they could feel like they were connected with that advisor through your selection process and they felt that maybe you had vetted them. So I think there's some requirement on the employer to really set the stage for which areas do you want to target and how that'll affect your employees. Do you want there to be access to further advice and sales, and how do you maybe mitigate some of those challenges? And then last, the cost of doing nothing. If you do not provide any education or financial resources for your employees, how does that affect your bottom line overall? Because employees they're not retiring on time. You do have that same financial burden with employees. They might feel like they don't have access to tools, so you're still experiencing that presenteeism and absenteeism at work. So what is the cost to you for not providing maybe some basic high-level education and basically some tools for your employees to access? Really, most of the time it's at no cost for the employees, but overall it could affect your productivity significantly over time. Anything else that you want me to add there, Eric, on financial wellness?
No, I don't think so.
And then do you think this is going to stay, or do you feel like we'll see this go away like the Thigh Master here?
Yeah, looking big to small. So if I look at large plan sponsors, one of their critical concerns is an aging workforce and the secondary costs of an aging workforce, Stephanie, that you mentioned. So from my perspective, I think that we are beginning to see a fair amount of interest. I think the challenge I continue to hear is that, by the time you get anybody into these financial wellness programs, they're in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. They've developed habits, and breaking habits can be difficult. So I think there'll be some stickiness to financial wellness, but there has to be some acknowledgement that you probably aren't going to be able to solve all your plan problems with a good financial wellness program. How about you?
I think it's here to stay. I think we'll see some fine tweaking on this where it's not just such a broad topic. I think we'll see providers start to hone in on certain areas that are meaningful to employers, but I think that there's definitely a need, and we'll see these programs continue to stick around.
Custom target date funds. We've been hearing a ton about custom target date funds over the last couple of years. And custom target date funds, for those of you who may not be familiar, are really the notion of having investment options or target date products that are built for the exclusive use of a specific client. Ultimately, the plan sponsor or their delegate is including asset classes, developing glide paths, determining how to shift and transition, what the policy objectives are as a portion of that. And there are some reasons that we're seeing greater and greater utilization. I think that one of them is plan sponsors spend a lot of time and effort putting together menus and wanting to be able to build target dates that incorporate the research that they put into their core menu, especially as we're clearly seeing allocation transitions out of core menus and into target date menus. Some of it's risk management, so having greater control over glide path and asset selection helps plan sponsors have more control, not necessarily reduce, but have more control over the risk they're experiencing. Probably the biggest one is glide path, right? Every plan sponsor has a different demographic, different workforce, different plan design. How do you, given the variety of products that are out there, find a match or the perceived perfect match to your specific demographic situation? And certainly the costs of creating custom target dates have continued to decline as record keepers have contributed to making that more readily available. The last thing that's driven it is the Department of Labor issued some guidance, and I guess it's guidance. They published it, so it would certainly qualify as guidance, and clearly this was under the prior Department of Labor administration. But you can look at, in looking at their perspective on target date things, really 8 things that they outlined. One of them was establishing a process for comparing and selecting, and certainly the periodic review. But if you make your way down to bullet point number 5 there, inquire about whether a custom or non-proprietary target date fund would be a better fit for your plan. So I think we had a number of plan sponsors when the Department of Labor came out with this guidance or education related to plan qualified default investment alternatives and target date funds. It said, okay, well, the department's telling me I should look at this. Perhaps there's a reason that I should be interested. There is a number of considerations, I think, when making a determination on whether to build or buy off the shelf or build custom target dates. One of them is clearly the heightened responsibility that comes. I think even as a plan sponsor, while the fiduciary responsibility for monitoring and selecting is likely identical whether you're building or buying, the reality is if you're building, your plan participants think about that very differently than if you've selected a target date. You may have to replace that target date at some point in time. Clearly, the additional monitoring criteria are material. Reviewing performance and allocations relative, developing future expectations about strategic allocations and selections is a significant difference in putting that work together. Certainly need for record-keeping synergies. If you're not a multi-$100 million retirement plan where you could potentially build collectives, if you're either a tax-exempt plan or a smaller for-profit entity, you're likely going to be utilizing the capabilities of your record keeper. So knowing that and having an expectation or an understanding of what their capabilities are is critical. The cost to manage is a big one. One of the things driving, at least in my experience, one of the things that's driving plan sponsors to consider custom target dates is that there is typically someone who is selling a custom target date solution, meaning that in exchange for a fee, they're willing to build and run your custom target date. That means that there's additional costs. You're incurring those additional costs as a plan sponsor. So you're going to have to get to a point where the performance, and I'm not talking about excess performance, but could be risk mitigation or just fit, but does the performance of the target date suite outweigh the risks, the cost and the additional risks to monitoring and developing those allocations independently? And when you do that, you've got to show it's in the best interest of the plan from a fiduciary perspective. So those are all really critical considerations that any plan sponsor should take into account when deciding whether the custom target date fit makes sense for them. So Stephanie, I'll throw it to you. Flash in the pan, or is this the long-term strategy?
I think we're going to continue to see more plans going towards the custom target date strategy. However, I do think that there is, as you mentioned, going to be increased scrutiny around this. So I think we're also going to see more measures taken to document the processes, and I think there's going to be more requirements of those plan sponsors. So yes, I think it's here to stay, but I also think that there's going to be a lot more asked of the plan sponsors that I think are building these out.
Great minds think alike. I do think that, again, large plan sponsors are where custom target dates began, and if things do begin to slow down, the expectation that you would see this further and further down market. I do think the economies of it will make that transition slower, perhaps, than some of these others. But given the amount of asset accumulation that we're seeing in target dates, and given the importance of them to the success of most retirement plans, it would not surprise me to see this trend continue in a pretty active way. So Stephanie, I'm going to throw it over to you for a fun topic, gamification.
Perfect. So what is gamification? It's the element of adding games or game-like components to retirement programs and platforms to encourage participation. I was thinking about the craze of Pokemon Go actually this weekend, and can you just imagine if everyone had the same zest for a game like that towards their retirement plan? It would be pretty exciting. However, maybe not the best fit for everyone, so we're going to go kind of through what that looks like and where we think that's headed. So gamification, why is this grabbing our attention? I think especially being a lot of folks are on the West Coast, there's a lot of technology, and I think that that's one element that maybe makes this something that's getting it more attention. But gamification can promote a user providing additional feedback in a different way. It can promote an employee logging in online to look at their account and actually collecting that sort of data and seeing really how they're utilizing the online systems and components available from a record keeper. Everyone has a phone these days. We're increasingly connected through smart devices. So if there's a way that can get people to be interactive with their retirement savings programs through an app or some sort of push messaging, I think that is something that we'll see kind of continue to grow, and also that gets people to maybe respond. The rise of tech savvy, so millennials, everyone has a cell phone, there's an app for everything these days, and also the millennials, the way that they like to interact and as quick responses. So logging in on an app, making quick purchases, things that take less time. I think that that's just the way the attention span is shorter, so we're seeing more and more of that. Mass popularity of gaming, just like I mentioned, the Pokemon Go, and there's still the PlayStation, all of those gaming consoles are still here to stay and on the rise. More exciting user experience I touched on quickly, but if there's a way that can make what some would feel a mundane topic, so you're checking your retirement plan balance, reallocating your funds, if there's a way that can grab a plan participant's interest that makes them actually go in and look at those things and actually take action, I think that's something that is going to create more feedback from plan sponsors or plan participants. Some considerations, I think anytime we have a user experience where we feel like it was quick, easy, it caught our attention, and oftentimes there's good feedback from that system, so maybe we're getting some sort of a reward or there's some sort of element of competition. I think that can be really fun for plan participants, depending on who you are. But some of the questions surrounding this would be, is the messaging clear? And will this actually produce a better participant outcome? So if every time you log in to check your account balance, you get a gold star, depending on what the long-term, accrual of that, or however that can tie back into your personal performance, is it something that's here to stay, and are we actually going to see a better response from plan participants and their engagement overall if there are gaming elements? There's competitive dynamics, so that is fun for some, but not everyone loves competition. So I think the competitive energy within a workforce can get folks talking, but that also can discourage certain participants if they feel like there is some competition associated, whether it just be with themselves. Sometimes it can cause frustration. Certain demographics might find gamification to be a challenge. I think that this is something that is very exciting maybe for the millennial group. However, sometimes if there's too much of a gaming element and too much excitement, it can detract from the core purpose. So we might see an older population not maybe utilizing the record-keeping platforms and such. If there's too much of a gaming element, it might detract really from why they're there, and they might find the system a challenge to use. And then I think that just ties into some segments might suffer. So depending on how tech-savvy you are, I think you're going to enjoy the gaming elements tied into the technology platform you're using more, and others, I think it might even deter them. So is there a way, depending on whoever's providing these gaming elements, whether it's your record keeper or TPA, I think we'd mainly see this in the record keeping platform side. Is there a way to have sort of a low stimulus platform for a certain demographic and sort of a high stimulus platform for a different audience? can it be customized that way? I think that would be a really important consideration. And also, where does it ultimately lead for that employee? What are the results for that participant to be participating in those elements? So, Eric, I'll hand it to you, and you let me know if you think this is something out with the old or in with the new. Eric, are you there?
Sorry about that. Audio difficulties, Stephanie. Is that better?
Yeah.
Good.
No worries. I was like, I think I dropped.
I say that is should be probably some elements will retain, but many elements will die off. I sat through a presentation from a provider the other day where they talked about their gamification system, and all these people had logged in and taken it. And they gave away a free iPad to the winner. And they said, well, yeah, how did that result in any changes in allocation or behavior? And they said, well, they logged in. And, logging in is a pretty low threshold for success, I think. The programs that I've seen that have been more effective are, your peers in this division save 7.2% of their pay, and you're saving 4%. And there's some really good data that would indicate that begins to change people's behavior because, nobody trusts what they're told by their employer, but if all their peers are doing something, that's more likely to get their impact. So I think some elements will survive, but others will likely die. Stephanie, your thoughts?
I actually had a question for you on that. And from a compliance standpoint, if a record keeper is giving away, if there's some sort of accrual for reward, I think that's a whole nother topic. Has that been touched on at all? I do think there's definitely some concerns about whether it's compensation. I do think that there's been a couple of Department of Labor guidelines on it that provide an opportunities for some flexibility. But that is something to certainly be aware of as you get into it. Excellent. I think it's here to stay. I think that generations just continue to be more reliant on their personal devices, and I think that technology just will continue to evolve. However, I do think that there will need to be some, like you said, protocol surrounding any sort of rewards that come from the gamification. And I think that we'll need to see sort of a tailored approach depending on who the end user is, because I don't think it's a great fit for everybody, but I do think we'll see more and more of it. Great. I'm going to take on socially responsible investment options. We're seeing tremendous implementation and growth in assets and socially responsible. A lot of that has occurred because of qualified retirement plans. Typically, socially responsible, for those of you who aren't familiar, are investment products that carry some form of specified social or religious criteria. So it could be your traditional SRI, it could be Catholic values, adherence to Sharia law, zero carbon type investment products for those that have more of an environmental consideration. Why are these popular right now? Certainly growing impact from investors. We're seeing, especially young millennials, a transition away from purely returns-based investing to some form of values investing. You look at websites like Kiva and others, or even just peer-to-peer lending as opportunities to both achieve a return, but potentially, drive a certain philosophy as well. The political climate, clearly has become a portion of that as well. People who are feeling much more identified to a particular set of political or religious beliefs. And one of the things like target date funds that has also fueled it is additional guidance from the Department of Labor, where the Department of Labor ultimately has said, no, you can use as part of your selection criteria investment products that have a social screening criteria as a portion of their mandate.
considerations, certainly performance and benchmarking. I think the Department of Labor was clear in their guidance that having terrible investment products that have a social screen is not adherence to your responsibilities as a fiduciary under ERISA. Adherence to your own investment policy statements. Anytime you're doing things that may be differing from your investment policy guidelines, you're creating a pretty grave risk. Your responsibilities as a plan fiduciary are to all participants, so making sure you're doing something that is consistent with that obligation. Additional oversight could be required. One of the things that we talk about with clients all the time is my social criteria may differ from that of the person next to me, and frankly, if I was to look at the dozens of people on the call, we could do a survey and probably come up with 12 or 15 or 18 different social screening methodologies or approaches that make sense. So how do you provide the level of oversight that's necessary to meet the needs of the greater population? And like so many of these things, proper communication and disclosure is critical. How do we disclose the information, make it available in such a way that participants can understand it, so that those participants who are eager to have that type of approach can have it, while simultaneously those who may want to avoid it have the opportunity to do so as well. So Stephanie, is this a blue jean staple or a parachute pants fad? Unless you still have parachute.
I do not have parachute pants. I think it's a blue jean staple. I think that we're going to just see more and more requests for this, and I think that the specialty fund classes will continue to grow, but just as with a couple things we've talked about already today, so will the scrutiny surrounding really the pure investment involved in actually meeting the needs of that specialty fund class. And is it really necessary and appropriate? I don't know, but I think we'll see that those sort of sectors with specialty classes growing.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I always use that big plan to small plan filter, and we're beginning to see the sprouts of this on the big plan side, but it's really being driven not necessarily by the large plan sponsors, but by the millennial new hires. Ultimately, they are our workforce for the next several decades. And I think that plan sponsors are quickly rethinking whether it's gamification or especially socially responsible investment alternatives. How do they create plans that speak to those populations? Stephanie, speaking of things millennials like, I'm going to throw it back to you for robo-advice.
Excellent. So robo-advice, the self-driving car of investment advice. So robo-advisors it's a digital platform, it's technology that provides automated, data-driven financial planning and asset allocation modeling, and it's all through technology. There's no human supervision. It's set up, with technology experts to meet certain allocation models, and it's supposed to just drive itself over time. So a robo-advisor platform typically goes through and it will collect information. A participant will usually through some electronic medium provide information to the robo-advisor system on their current financial situation, and the robo-advisor will basically create an asset allocation model for that participant based on their current assets, risk, and future goals. So some of the systems collect more data than others, but ideally the robo-advisor is going to set a target allocation for an employee. When I say target allocation, I mean a certain percent equity and fixed income based on their risk tolerance and their goals, and is going to sort of like a target date, but adjust over time as things in that individual's life either change, so additional data is collected, or as they age. So how we see robo-advice in the market is through managed accounts primarily, so a managed account offering through a record keeper, or there is a system called Betterment, which does managed account services as well, but Betterment also is a tool people can use in their personal financial planning. So why is this trending and becoming so popular? I think that most record keepers offer a managed account solution. So in addition to whatever sort of advice component that they might be offering. Every platform is different. There's usually a managed account solution that either the employer can pay for the employee, but most common, the plan participant is actually paying for it themselves, a small charge. And it's really an add-on. It's really simple when you're on the technology platform to select that service. So I think that the growing amount of plan participants who say, I don't want to be building an asset allocation myself, this is a customized solution, it's relatively inexpensive, and that are just clicking yes to that, I think that makes it really easy. So we're seeing a lot of folks in these managed account or robo-advice solutions just because the pure convenience and access to the record-keeping system. There's also an argument that robo-advice is somewhat more customized than being in a target date fund per se. That's the best comparison to this, because there's more questions surrounding the person's personal financial situation. So ideally, there's going to be risk-based models that more closely align with that participant. And when I say ideally, who's to really say that the allocation is going to end up that much different than an age-based target date? There hasn't been that much data collected on this thus far, and it would really vary participant to participant. It's relatively inexpensive. So if a participant feels like they want customized advice and they don't have a financial advisor and they want that custom asset mix built for them, it's a relatively inexpensive way to get a customized solution. And then it also allows for a plan participant to input data without face-to-face interaction. Some might feel like that's a negative, but I think there's a lot of folks that feel that's positive. It's pretty quick. You go in, you're putting in all the information into an online system. So there's really basic questions that are being asked of the participant, and they don't have to interact with anybody, and there isn't really any further questioning, which to some folks I think that's quick, easy, a nice way to input the data. So next I would say some considerations surrounding this. There isn't enough data on the robo-advice model, such as the managed account versus target date, to say that a custom managed account mix from a robo-advising system would actually outperform maybe your age-appropriate target date. So that's yet to be seen. I think that we'll see more data coming back from that in the future. However, it's pretty hard to measure based on how the models are actually made. So that leads me to my next bullet, is on a record-keeping system, depending on which one, the managed accounts are really a recommendation, an asset mix of using a composition of the plan's existing funds. So a couple things there. If there's 15 funds in a retirement plan menu, if an employee goes in and puts their data in, the managed account system's going to output a mixture and an allocation based on those 15 underlying funds. So I guess the first consideration relating to this would be, if the underlying menu doesn't cover maybe the spectrum of asset classes that an employee might want in their personal portfolio, or maybe need to get their target risk allocation, can be a concern. I guess second consideration there is, if the underlying funds aren't great, depending on the existing menu, your managed account proposal from the system isn't necessarily going to be wonderful either, because it's using that pre-existing underlying menu that's already been created. So I guess it would be essentially, it could be garbage in, garbage out if the underlying investment menu was not maybe optimized or the most effective lineup to start with. And then the performance also is going to be symptomatic of that original investment menu as well. And then I guess next thing I would say is the recommendation is only as good as the data the system collects. So if a participant is going through and they maybe aren't filling in all the fields or answering all the questions, then the robo-advising system's only going to have so much information to generate the, I guess I don't want to say proposal, but to generate their new asset mix. So if the information is incorrect, if the participant's making a guess at it, maybe they're leaving certain fields blank, the recommendation is really going to speak to that. So unless a plan participant is really organized and actually knows their whole financial situation and understands the questions properly, their output is going to be symptomatic of that as well. And then I guess the last thing that I think is important, we talked about how it might be preferred for some folks not to have the face-to-face interaction. There is intuition that does come from, if we're comparing robo-advice versus a one-on-one interaction of a person with a financial advisor, there isn't going to be that intuition coming from the system. So if there are other considerations such as, college planning for children, or, maybe a spouse's income is going to change, or long-term planning is going to have take a significantly different shape for that participant, the system isn't going to know that as a technology interface. So some could say that if you're working with a true advisor one-on-one, which would cost you more, but that advisor is going to know, there's going to be intuition, and they're going to pick up on things that are maybe a user interface could not. So other considerations that you might want to think of when you're doing long-term planning. So I'll pass it to you, Eric. Do you think this is built to last or a quick fix?
Yeah, I think that this is built to last. Again, I think the data around the trust level that younger employees have regarding technology is very, very high. You look at, some of the millennials now have lived in a world where, Amazon would tell them what book they're most likely to enjoy. Apple Music tells them what song they're likely to enjoy. They're very accustomed to technology helping them make decisions and have a high level of trust ultimately in the technology behind that. So, and as the price of those things continues to come down from a managed account perspective specifically, I think you will begin to see more people transition, especially because the providers seem to be pushing it pushing it pretty hard for both the reasons Stephanie mentioned, but also because there is a revenue stream, an additional revenue stream on those managed account products. How about you, Stephanie?
I agree with you. I think that it's easy, and I think that it does provide for at least the feeling of enhanced customization. So I think it's here to stay. I do think we're going to see more offerings that do allow for an even more enhanced level of customization. So, for instance, Betterment offers 100 profiles of customization for a plan participant, where some of the other systems maybe only offer 10. So I think we're going to start to see that, where there's going to be more questions, more intuition built into the software, and I think there will be more models for the managed account solutions, which will enable those systems to get a little bit closer to the participants' needs.
Great. I'm going to take up the last of our trends today, which is 338 services under the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA. Multnomah Group serves as an investment consultant to retirement plans. We serve as an investment consultant under both 338 arrangements as well as 321 arrangements. We have noticed a certain increase in the volume of inquiries, not necessarily the number of folks who want to use 338, but certainly the number of questions around it seems to be increasing. So for those who aren't familiar, the 38th definition under Section 3 of ERISA defines the term investment manager. And to qualify as an investment manager under ERISA, you have to have the authority to manage, acquire, and dispose of assets in the plan. You've got to be registered under the Investment Advisor Act of 1940, and you need to acknowledge your fiduciary status with respect to the plan. So The difference between the typical 321 or investment advisor relationship, where your consultant may make a recommendation to the committee may act or not on that recommendation, versus 338, is that the investment consultant would come in and say, we are replacing on this date Fund X with Fund Y. Here are the reasons that we're doing that. And then the plan sponsor's only option is whether to fire the 338 or to allow that process to go through. Why is this popular right now? Certainly there is some documented positions among some in the legal community that this provides a greater level of protection. The greater level of protection being that each fund action that the plan engages in is no longer the fiduciary responsibility of the plan sponsor. So if Fund X is replaced with Fund Y, the fiduciary obligation for that decision resides with the 338 versus the 321 model, where that fiduciary responsibility would be shared among the two parties. Second reason, it's been heavily marketed. I think as record keepers are trying to differentiate, clearly advisors are trying to differentiate, so you have specific segments within the advisory community that are pushing very hard for 338 as some kind of differentiation opportunity. And it provides this broader outsource of duty. Important to point out that the 338 decision does not alleviate responsibility the way that it has been perceived. So if you are a 401k or 403b plan sponsor, regardless of whether you currently have a consultant or don't have a consultant, ultimately your plan has a 338, actually has a number of 338s. Each one of the investment products you make available is a 338 investment manager. And as a result, you, the plan sponsor, don't have liability for whether they bought Apple, sold Apple, bought Google, sold Google, bought treasuries or sold treasuries. That responsibility resides with the investment manager, and they have some liability for that as investment managers. However, ultimately, you, the plan sponsor, have a responsibility to oversee all of the service providers that are retained by the plan. So why do retirement committees go through this process of reviewing investment options and performance? It's to demonstrate that oversight of these 338s. So by retaining a 338 to oversee your 338s, you haven't alleviated your oversight responsibility. You still have a duty to oversee your 338. I guess hypothetically you could hire another 321 to oversee the 338 that's overseeing the 338s, but at a certain point we're probably getting more providers than most plan sponsors are comfortable utilizing. So it's important to point out that critical retained obligation for you as a plan sponsor. The 338 model works well. We have clients where it works exceptionally well. However, it is not one that alleviates all fiduciary responsibilities. It just changes the responsibilities from looking at any individual fund action to looking at the totality of the relationship with the 338 and what they're able to add value or not to your retirement plan engagement. Considerations between 321 and 338 services. Clearly, first and foremost, and the one that frankly a lot of clients struggle with, aside from the fiduciary considerations I mentioned earlier, is the loss of control over investment menu and timing. Plan sponsors have grown accustomed to being able to develop and nurture and monitor their own investment menu over time. Losing that is a big step for many plan sponsors. The second I mentioned, this obligation to oversee service providers, and the 338 being one of them. Most plan sponsors have a process for overseeing their mutual funds or their variable annuities. Having a process to oversee a delegated investment manager who's making fund swaps is something they're less familiar with and less comfortable with. No room for customization or really committee input. The committee can make input. The 338, however, can either take or not the input that they're being provided. But one of the bigger considerations probably is the potential for increased cost. I think various models produce various outcomes, but we are clearly seeing that a number of investment consultants in the marketplace are charging some form of additional fee for the perceived liability for serving the 338 capacity. And frankly, very few of those engagements have had a chance to make their way into a class action setting to be tested by the courts or even the Department of Labor for that matter. So, Stephanie, hot or not?
I think that the 338 is hot, and I actually had a question I wanted you to touch on really quickly regarding, and it mentions kind of the out of the box. What I would just say that what are the implications for a plan sponsor that's maybe using like the kind of the add-on service of a 338 through like a Mesero, or there's various vendors that are offering it through the record keeper, but sort of what are the posed liabilities to them when you use an add-on service, and what does that really look like, and does that still check the boxes for the plan sponsor on process and due diligence?
Yeah, so Stephanie's referring to a lot of the record keepers have tack-on 338 services where you hire XYZ record keeper, and XYZ record keeper has a relationship with one of the firms or some others that Stephanie mentioned, where you can, for an additional fee, you can buy that service and they will select and replace your investment options. I think the challenges are largely the same. I'd add one additional challenge, which is that typically in those arrangements, the investment consultant that's being tacked on has been selected by the record keeper. So if your investment consultant has been selected by your record keeper, the possibility for internal conflicts of interest would appear to rise dramatically. So for instance, if I'm XYZ mutual fund company and I want to hire a 338 and I do a search of all the various investment consultants and I hire the Jim's Trust Company as my 338 outsource provider, there would seem to me to be at least a potential that one of the reasons that trust company was selected is because they have a more favorable view than the rest of the marketplace of the exact funds that the mutual fund company manages in addition to providing record keeping services. And that could create some challenges. I think the other challenge is that this is exclusively a byproduct of the small plan marketplace. And the small plan marketplace, to an even greater degree, lacks the internal systems and personnel to monitor a tack-on 338 service provider. So again, there's I would think, a very significantly incorrect belief that by hiring in that manner, that they've in some way reduced or eliminated their fiduciary duty. I think all they've done is modify it.
Yeah, that's what I would say. I think that's here in the small plan market space, you are seeing that sort of out of the box co-fiduciary support purchased through the record keeper, and I think that we're seeing more of that just because there's a lot of uncertainty surrounding the fiduciary rules. So whether it's a good thing or not, I think it's here to stay for a while until there's more instructions surrounding that.
So I'm going to say I actually think that one is not. I think it's a very niche solution, 338s out of the box specifically. I do think that 338s in aggregate will survive. I don't see them in the large plan market as a result. Very, very few times have I seen things wash up. But with that, trying to take you down memory lane as I did as I was looking back at some of the trends of the last 30 or 40 years, or at least since the advent of ERISA. We'll kind of open it up right now for any questions that may pop up. Give it one more minute.
I think people want to know I have MySpace as a trend. Don't people still have MySpace accounts?
I was checking your account before we started today's presentation to see if you had any retirement plan stuff up there.
Yeah.
Well, like most of these things, they have a purpose at a time, and the question is whether they last or not. We want to thank everybody for attending today's presentation. We appreciate it. Again, if you have questions at the conclusion of the presentation that don't get answered, feel free to respond to the email with the contents, and we'd be happy to take questions that way as well. We hope everybody has a great Monday. We appreciate you joining us at this hour on this date, and look forward to touching base soon. Thanks so much, Stephanie, and thanks to all of you.
Thank you.